Imagine someone you've always been able to count on. They forgive your mistakes, answer your late night messages, overlook your emotional distance, and somehow keep believing there's still something worth saving. Now imagine waking up one day and realizing that person has become completely silent. No arguments, no emotional speeches, no desperate attempts to fix what's broken, just peace. Most people think the loudest moment in a relationship is the fight. Psychology suggests something very different. The quietest moment is often the one that changes everything. Here's the hidden truth almost nobody notices. People rarely appreciate emotional availability while they still have unlimited access to it. The human brain is wired to adapt. We quickly begin treating consistency as normal, effort as expected, and loyalty as permanent. Until one day, it isn't. Have you ever wondered why someone suddenly starts chasing after a person they ignored for months? Why they become affectionate only after the other person emotionally disconnects? It seems irrational on the surface, but beneath it lies one of the most predictable patterns in human behavior. This isn't about revenge. It isn't about playing games or pretending not to care. It's about something much deeper. There comes a point when a highly empathetic person reaches emotional exhaustion. After investing energy into understanding everyone else's feelings, they quietly realize nobody has been trying to understand theirs. What's fascinating is that this shift is almost invisible in the beginning. There are no dramatic announcements, no final warnings. Instead, body language changes. Conversations become shorter. Emotional reactions disappear. Expectations quietly fade. And the people around them often mistake this calmness for temporary distance, without realizing they're witnessing the final stage of emotional detachment. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the moment a super empath truly stops caring creates such a dramatic shift in relationship dynamics. You'll discover the psychology behind emotional investment, why people suddenly change their behavior when empathy disappears, and what this teaches us about trust, attraction, communication, and human nature itself. Because once a super empath stops caring, almost everything changes, but probably not in the way most people think. Most people assume a super empath stops caring because they suddenly become cold. In reality, the opposite is usually true. They stop caring because they've cared for too long without seeing meaningful change. The emotional withdrawal isn't impulsive. It's the final stage of a long psychological process. Here's what most people completely miss. Human beings naturally protect their emotional energy. When repeated effort leads to repeated disappointment, the brain begins to recognize a pattern. Over time, hope starts giving way to acceptance. Instead of asking, "How can I fix this relationship?" the question quietly becomes, "What if this relationship was never mine to fix?" This is where relationship dynamics begin to change. A super empath often spends months, sometimes years, explaining, forgiving, and searching for reasons behind another person's behavior. They notice stress, childhood wounds, fear of vulnerability, or insecure attachment. Their emotional intelligence allows them to understand almost everyone, but that same strength can become a weakness when understanding replaces healthy boundaries. Have you ever noticed someone who always defended another person's actions, only to suddenly stop making excuses altogether? That shift isn't random. It's a sign that their internal dialogue has changed. They no longer spend mental energy trying to solve someone else's emotional puzzle. Imagine a woman who constantly checks in on her partner after every disagreement. She sends thoughtful messages, starts difficult conversations, and reassures him even when she's hurting herself. At first, she believes patience will create closeness. But after countless cycles where nothing truly improves, something unexpected happens. She doesn't become angry. She becomes peaceful. She no longer waits anxiously for a reply. She sleeps better. She laughs more with friends. Her attention naturally moves toward people who return the same level of care. From the outside, this can look confusing. The partner may think, she's finally giving me space, but psychologically, something much more significant has happened. The emotional investment that once fueled the relationship has quietly been redirected. This changes everything because attention is one of the strongest forms of emotional reinforcement. When it disappears, people often become aware of its value for the very first time. Have you ever noticed that some people don't seem to value a relationship until they feel it slipping away? It happens so often that many assume it's simply bad timing. In reality, psychology offers a more revealing explanation. When a super empath stops caring, the emotional environment changes, and that shift can expose feelings that were hidden beneath comfort and routine. Here's what most people completely miss. The human mind adapts quickly to consistency. If someone is always available, always understanding, and always willing to repair conflict, their effort can become part of the background. Not because the other person is necessarily cruel, but because familiarity reduces our awareness of what we already have. We stop noticing the value of something that has never seemed at risk of disappearing. Now picture what happens when that consistency quietly ends. The good morning texts become less frequent. The long conversations disappear. The need for reassurance fades. There are no emotional demands, no attempts to force closeness, and no pressure to reconnect. The silence feels different because it isn't meant to provoke a reaction. It's genuine acceptance. For the other person, this creates an unexpected psychological contrast. They suddenly experience the absence of something that once felt guaranteed. The emotional support they relied on without fully recognizing it is no longer there. That absence often forces them to reflect on the relationship in a way they never did before. Imagine a man who always assumed his partner would forgive every mistake. After every disagreement, she was the first to reach out. She checked on him, encouraged him, and tried to rebuild the connection. Then one day, she simply stopped. Weeks passed without emotional pursuit. When they crossed paths again, she smiled politely, spoke with confidence, and continued with her day. There was no resentment in her voice, only calm. For the first time, he realized he wasn't losing an argument. He was losing access to someone who had quietly become one of the most stable parts of his life. This is where body language often tells the real story. People who once seemed emotionally distant may suddenly seek more eye contact, initiate conversations, or look for excuses to reconnect. They're responding to a change in emotional dynamics rather than to pressure or manipulation. Their behavior reflects a new awareness that wasn't triggered by conflict, but by the realization that the relationship no longer revolves around them. But here's an important distinction. A super empath who has truly detached isn't trying to make someone chase them. Their peace doesn't depend on another person's reaction. Whether someone comes back or not, they've already shifted their focus toward protecting their emotional well-being instead of rescuing someone else's. And that's the real turning point. Once emotional energy is no longer spent convincing someone to care, it becomes available for something far more powerful, rebuilding self-respect, confidence, and healthy boundaries. One of the biggest misconceptions about super empaths is that they're naturally weak because they're compassionate. In reality, compassion without boundaries creates exhaustion, but compassion with boundaries creates strength. The moment a super empath stops caring isn't the moment they stop loving people. It's the moment they stop sacrificing themselves to earn love in return. Almost nobody realizes that healthy relationships are built on mutual responsibility, not endless emotional rescue. When one person constantly carries the emotional weight for two people, the relationship slowly becomes unbalanced. The super empath listens, forgives, adapts, and gives second chances, believing that enough patience will eventually inspire change. But patience cannot replace accountability. This is where a psychological blind spot often appears. Many people confuse kindness with unlimited access. If someone always says yes, always understands, and always makes room for another excuse, the brain begins to expect that pattern. Expectations quietly replace appreciation. Without intending to, people can start assuming the super empath will always be there, no matter how little effort they give in return. Have you ever noticed how some relationships only become balanced after one person finally says, no more? That isn't because conflict suddenly becomes attractive. It's because boundaries reveal reality. They show who respects your limits and who only enjoyed your lack of them. Imagine a woman who spent years canceling her own plans whenever her partner needed emotional support. She believed love meant always being available. But over time, she realized her own goals, friendships, and peace had slowly disappeared. Instead of making dramatic announcements, she simply began honoring her own schedule. If she had plans, she kept them. If a conversation became disrespectful, she ended it calmly instead of arguing for hours. At first, her partner accused her of changing. In truth, she hadn't become less caring. She had become healthier. This shift also changes body language in remarkable ways. People with healthy boundaries tend to move differently. Their posture becomes more relaxed, their eye contact steadier, and their speech more deliberate. They stop seeking approval in every conversation because their confidence no longer depends on someone else's validation. Others often notice this change before they can even explain it. What's fascinating is that confidence isn't something a super empath suddenly develops overnight. It grows naturally when emotional energy is no longer wasted trying to control outcomes they were never responsible for. Instead of asking, how do I make this person understand me? They begin asking, does this relationship allow me to be my healthiest self? That single question transforms every future decision. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Once a super empath establishes real boundaries, people around them begin to reveal their true intentions. Some respect those boundaries and grow alongside them. Others resist, manipulate, or withdraw because they were benefiting from the old dynamic. One of the most revealing moments in any relationship isn't when everything is going well. It's what happens after a super empath stops chasing, stops explaining, and stops trying to hold everything together. That's when people's true motivations often become impossible to hide. Here's what most people completely miss. As long as one person is constantly repairing every misunderstanding, smoothing over every conflict, and carrying the emotional burden, the relationship never has to prove its real strength. It survives because one person refuses to let it fail. But the moment that effort quietly disappears, the relationship begins standing on its own. And that's when the truth becomes visible. This isn't about testing anyone. Healthy relationships don't need secret experiments or emotional games. It's simply that when the emotional pressure from one side is removed, the other person's natural behavior becomes easier to observe. Without realizing it, they begin showing what they genuinely value rather than what they say they value. Have you ever noticed that some people only reach out when they need something? Others only become affectionate after they've sensed emotional distance. Then there are those who consistently communicate, even when life gets busy, because they understand that trust is built through steady effort rather than occasional intensity. These differences aren't random, they're behavioral patterns, and patterns usually tell a more honest story than promises. Imagine a couple who have spent years repeating the same cycle. Every disagreement ends the same way. One partner apologizes first, starts the conversation, and works tirelessly to reconnect, while the other waits passively, assuming everything will eventually return to normal. Then one day, that familiar cycle stops. Days turn into weeks, and the expected message never comes. At first, the other partner feels relieved. They think the conflict has simply faded away. But as time passes, something unexpected happens. The silence no longer feels comfortable, it feels meaningful. They begin replaying old conversations in their mind, noticing moments they once ignored. They remember acts of kindness they barely acknowledged, emotional support they quietly depended on, and opportunities to show appreciation that they allowed to pass by. For the first time, they're forced to confront a question they had never seriously considered. Was I maintaining this relationship, or was someone else carrying it for me? Body language often reflects this realization before words ever do. Someone who once seemed emotionally unavailable may suddenly lean into conversations, seek reassurance through prolonged eye contact, or become unusually attentive to small details. They're not just reacting to absence, they're responding to the awareness that the emotional balance they relied upon has fundamentally changed. Of course, not everyone responds with reflection. Some react with blame, guilt, or manipulation. They may accuse the super empath of becoming selfish, distant, or uncaring. Psychologically, this is often a defense mechanism. Accepting responsibility requires confronting uncomfortable truths, and many people instinctively avoid that discomfort. It's easier to believe someone else has changed than to admit they've overlooked the value that was always in front of them. But here's where it gets truly transformative. A super empath who has reached this stage no longer measures success by whether someone finally understands them. Their peace no longer depends on another person's realization. If genuine accountability appears, they're capable of recognizing it. If it doesn't, they continue moving forward without resentment because they've learned that emotional maturity means accepting reality rather than fighting it. And that leads to another powerful shift. Once a super empath stops seeking validation from people who cannot consistently give it, they begin attracting relationships built on mutual respect instead of emotional imbalance. In Keynote 5, we'll explore how this inner transformation changes confidence, attraction, and the kinds of people who naturally become part of their life. One of the most surprising things about a super empath's transformation is that the biggest change isn't what happens around them, it's what happens within them. When they stop investing all of their emotional energy into fixing people who don't want to grow, they begin investing in something they may have neglected for years: themselves. This changes everything because confidence is rarely built through compliments or external validation. It grows from keeping promises to yourself. Every time a super empath honors a boundary, walks away from disrespect, or chooses peace over unnecessary conflict, they send a powerful message to their own mind. My needs matter too. Here's what most people completely miss. Attraction isn't just about appearance, charm, or saying the right words. Human beings are naturally drawn to emotional stability. Someone who communicates calmly, respects themselves, and doesn't chase approval creates a sense of security that others instinctively notice. It's not because they're trying to impress anyone. It's because authenticity has replaced anxiety. Have you ever met someone whose presence immediately made you feel calm? They didn't dominate the conversation or seek attention. They listened carefully, spoke with purpose, and never seemed desperate to be liked. That quiet confidence often comes from emotional self-awareness rather than personality alone. People trust them because their actions consistently match their words. Imagine a man who spent years trying to earn affection by constantly proving his value. He solved everyone's problems, avoided difficult conversations, and ignored his own emotional needs to keep the peace. Eventually, he realized that every relationship built on self-sacrifice left him feeling invisible. Instead of searching for another person to validate him, he began focusing on his own growth. He reconnected with old friends, pursued hobbies he had abandoned, improved his communication skills, and learned to express his feelings honestly without fearing rejection. Months later, something unexpected happened. The people entering his life were different. Conversations felt balanced. Respect came naturally. Disagreements became opportunities for understanding instead of battles for control. The difference wasn't that the world had suddenly changed. He had changed the standard for what he was willing to accept. Bady language reflects this transformation in subtle but powerful ways. There's less nervous fidgeting, fewer attempts to fill every silence, and more relaxed eye contact. Their smile feels genuine because it isn't covering emotional exhaustion. Their confidence doesn't come from believing they're better than others. It comes from knowing they no longer need to abandon themselves to keep someone else close. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Not everyone will appreciate this new version of the super empath. Some people were comfortable with the old dynamic because it required very little from them. Healthy boundaries now require mutual effort, honest communication, and emotional accountability. Those who aren't willing to grow may quietly drift away, and that's not a loss, it's clarity. Because the greatest transformation isn't that a super empath stops caring about everyone else. It's that they finally start caring about themselves with the same compassion they've always offered others. In Keynote 6, we'll bring everything together and explore the lasting lesson behind this transformation. Why true emotional strength isn't about changing other people, but about changing the relationship you have with yourself. By the time a super empath truly stops caring, something remarkable has already happened. The focus is no longer on whether someone else will change. The focus has quietly shifted toward becoming the kind of person who no longer abandons themselves to preserve a relationship. This is the lesson that ties everything together. Emotional maturity isn't measured by how much pain you can tolerate or how many chances you're willing to give. It's measured by your ability to recognize when compassion needs to be balanced with self-respect. Without that balance, empathy becomes emotional overextension, and even the strongest relationships begin to suffer. Have you ever noticed how some people seem to repeat the same relationship over and over, even with different partners? The faces change, but the emotional pattern stays the same. That's because behavioral patterns don't disappear until we become aware of them. Self-awareness interrupts the cycle. Once you recognize why you're drawn to certain dynamics, you gain the ability to make different choices. Imagine someone who once believed their worth came from being needed. Every relationship revolved around fixing problems, calming emotions, and preventing conflict. At first, this felt meaningful, but over time, they realized they had built an identity around rescuing others instead of knowing themselves. The moment they stepped away from that role, they discovered something unexpected. Their value had never depended on how much they could sacrifice. It had always existed independently of anyone else's approval. This realization transforms communication. Instead of speaking from fear of losing someone, they begin speaking from honesty. They express appreciation without becoming dependent. They listen without absorbing every emotional burden. They disagree without feeling guilty. And perhaps most importantly, they stop confusing someone's potential with their actual behavior. Hope is no longer based on promises. It's based on consistent actions. Baby language reflects this inner shift as well. Their movements become calm and intentional. They no longer seek constant reassurance through facial expressions or endless explanations. They become comfortable with silence because they no longer believe every quiet moment needs to be filled with emotional effort. That quiet confidence often influences the people around them more than words ever could. Here's what almost nobody realizes. When a super empath stops caring, it isn't the end of love. It's the end of loving in a way that requires self-neglect. They still care deeply. They still value connection. But they now understand that healthy love grows through mutual respect, honest communication, trust, and shared responsibility, not through one person carrying the entire emotional weight of the relationship. And perhaps that's the greatest psychological insight of all. The relationships that survive this transformation are usually the ones built on genuine reciprocity. The ones that fall apart often depended on imbalance from the very beginning. What feels like an ending is often the beginning of seeing people and yourself with far greater clarity. As you go through your own relationships, pay attention not just to what people say, but to the patterns they repeat. Observe how they respond to your boundaries, how they handle accountability, and whether their actions consistently reflect their words. Those patterns will often tell you more than any promise ever could. Most importantly, remember this. Your empathy is a gift, but it was never meant to come at the expense of your own well-being. The healthiest relationships are not the ones where one person gives everything. They're the ones where both people feel seen, heard, respected, and safe enough to grow together. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more about relationship psychology, human behavior, and communication, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss our future content. Until next time, stay curious, stay self-aware, and never stop learning about the fascinating psychology behind human connection.